This is the Extra Point Podcast from Arizona's Family.
All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to a special edition of the Extra Point Podcast. We are live in the newsroom in our brand new digital setup. It's the NFL free agent frenzy. There is a lot happening, and who else better to talk to than our very own Extra Point Hall of Famer, the one, the only, Howard Balzer, zooming in here for our maiden voyage here in the newsroom. Howard, how are you today in the middle of this NFL free agent frenzy?
Oh my goodness, it's been, heck, nothing becomes official until a couple of hours with the start of the league year at 1 o'clock Arizona time. But the last 2 days, yes, have been a frenzy. It's closing in already, Mark, on 200 players.
Wow.
That have either switched teams or re-signed with their original teams just in the last 48 hours. That's the way it normally is. I'll tell you, by the end of the week and going into next week, it'll be pretty much over. There'll still be players signing here and there, but most of the heavy lifting will get done by the end of this weekend.
Well, let's talk about the big fish news that just came down. I'm going to bring up a picture right here on the screen right now. This was tweeted by Adam Schefter. What you're looking at here is a picture of Aaron Rodgers. It says Howard Balzer on the screen, but that is Aaron Rodgers in a Jets uniform. And, of course, that's been photoshopped. Who knows if he's going to wear number 12 for the New York Jets, because that's actually that's retired. That's Joe Namath's number. So as you kind of heard that on the Pat McAfee show and thought, okay, this is official, that Aaron Rodgers says he's going to be a New York Jet. He wants to be a New York Jet. There's just compensation that needs to be worked out. How does that change the balance of power right now, in your opinion, in the National Football League?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, we saw a Jets team last year that after about 10 or 11 games, they looked like they were in position to make the playoffs and didn't finish the season strong. And now, of course, they get Aaron Rodgers, like you said. They just have to finalize the deal. But this has been pretty much clear it was going to happen. I mean, the Jets agreed to terms with Alan Lazard, an unrestricted free agent from the Packers, who of course was a teammate of Rodgers. There's also talk about Randall Cobb and Rodgers saying, "Hey, here's guys that I want around me." So you look at that AFC East with the Bills. We saw what the Dolphins did last year. Obviously, the Patriots are still competitive. Now you throw the Jets in there, and this division is pretty impressive. Then, of course, the other part of it is we'll learn the schedule for 2023. Probably in a couple of months, at some point, first or second week in May. And I would tend to say, Mark, that there's going to be a bunch of – there always are national games for the Jets anyway because they're a New York team. But now it'll be even more, especially when you look at the schedule and, the attractive teams that the Jets will be playing. So, now granted, the AFC is strong overall. I mean, you look at the teams, the quarterbacks in that conference, it's very top-heavy. So it'll be competitive, obviously, for the Jets, but it certainly makes the Jets relevant.
All right, I'm bringing up right now your picture from social media, your Twitter. This is you at the 1981 NFL Draft. We've talked about this on the podcast before. How much have you seen NFL free agency change since 1981 in the draft? What does that look like now if you look back at 1981 and the draft and what the television process was like back then?
Well, there really wasn't free agency. If you go back to then, they did have a free agent system, but if a player switched teams, then the commissioner had the ability to name what the compensation was. And then it changed throughout the years. Back in the 80s, late 80s, there was called Plan B free agency, where teams took a certain number of players, but it didn't leave very much there. But it was interesting, Mark, because I can remember going to league meeting, and you'd get guys like Tex Schramm of the Cowboys, or a guy named Jack Conlon, who was in charge of the NFL Management Council. And Schramm would often say, there will be free agency in the NFL over my dead body.
Wow.
Well, of course, we know it happened, in the 90s. And I would argue this, that it has been the biggest boon for the NFL of anything. I mean, obviously, there's so many things. But what free agency did was it's created this, 24/7, 365 frenzy in the NFL, which after the season begins with free agency, then leads into the draft, and you have all the changes of players going from team to team, and it's only up-ramped the interest that there is in this league. It's probably obviously they're spending a lot of money, but bottom line is the money that's assigned to the salary cap, a large part of it is based on it's all based on revenue. And when we see these TV contracts and attendance and all those things, that's why there's all this money being thrown around when you hit a salary cap of $228 million per team. So it's changed tremendously. You need a scorecard to keep track of all the changes of players going from team to team. And, I mentioned just in the last 2 days, I think it's close to 90 players that have already been agreed to contracts, and that includes some trades. Almost 90 players have already agreed to switch teams, and obviously we're going to see a whole lot more in the coming days and weeks.
All right. Well, one of those famous stories, you mentioned Tex Schramm grew up in the Dallas area, watching him on Dallas Cowboy Weekly. He was a GM who hosted his own television show, and one of the famous stories was Roger Staubach was upset about his contract and wanted to redo his contract, and he actually went to Cowboy headquarters. Schramm wouldn't meet with him, so Staubach went out on the scaffolding around, I think it was like a 3 or 4 story building, and climbed up on the window and was knocking on Schramm's window. So, yeah, what a difference a couple decades make. I'm going to bring up your tweet right here talking about Byron Murphy right now. So you have this information about Byron Murphy's information about his contract. It was kind of sad to see today. The Saguaro High alum is from here, is leaving the Cardinals and go to the Minnesota Vikings. So tell us about your tweet here. It looks like the report had been inflated by the agent. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it happens all the time at this time of year. And I think everyone has to always have extreme caution when you see these contracts that they're reported immediately. And basically what's normally reported immediately is the years, the total value, and the total guaranteed money. But a lot of times that guaranteed money is inflated because a lot of it is not fully guaranteed at signing. And the other part that often happens when someone sees a report that says a contract is worth up to a certain dollar amount, that means the agent who told a reporter to get it out on social media, that means he's included incentives that are in the contract that is not really part of the base deal. And so these get reported out. Then the real numbers come out normally within 24 to 48 hours. And so that initial information can be very, very misleading. It also doesn't tell you what the salary cap hit is this year. And in the case of Byron Murphy, it was reported at $22 million, but the base value of it is only, we all put, of course, only in quotes these days, but the base value is $17.5 million. And then the other point is it was reported as $12.6 million now, as we know the details, guaranteed, but only $8.1 million of that is fully guaranteed. Other $4.5 million becomes guaranteed next year. So this is essentially, Mark, a 1 year, $8.1 million contract that they can get out of after 1 year if the Vikings choose. And his cap number this year is a pretty reasonable $4.9 million. So, here's a very good player, granted coming off a back injury, but a very good player who got away from the Cardinals and didn't get that great a contract from the Vikings. But it seems like this is the way the Cardinals are going to treat free agency, and it'll be very interesting to see how the roster continues to get built.
And you look at the 2019 draft class, or what's left of it, the only member of the 2019 draft class that is still on the Cardinals roster is Kyler Murray. So, I mean, I've heard you say it on social media with what the Cardinals are doing with their money this offseason. What would you call it, the dollar store buys here? I mean, what do you expect out of the Cardinals here in the upcoming season if Zach Allen goes to the Broncos, Murphy's gone, and all we've seen is Kelvin Beachum so far?
Well, we saw Kelvin Beachum. Of course, we saw Kaiser White of the Eagles, who was with Jonathan Gannon in Philadelphia, did sign. And that deal was inflated also. It was reported as 2 years for $11 million. It's really only 2 years for 10 because there's $1 million of incentives of it. And he's only going to count $3.25 million against the cap.
That's a good deal.
Year. Yeah, exactly. There's $6 million guaranteed. That includes a $3.5 million signing bonus. Kelvin Beachum's deal is very team friendly. It looks like that's what we're going to see from this team. I mean, Will Hernandez, I don't know how the contract is structured yet, but they re-signed him for a reported 2 years and $9 million. So it looks like this is what we're going to see from the Cardinals. Mostly, 1 to 3 year deals for not a tremendous amount of money. Build a roster up with a bunch of players, and they still have some guys making money, obviously with Zach Ertz and James Conner and Budda Baker, but it's hard to imagine wondering how competitive this roster is going to be. And then you throw in, of course, the whole factor of Kyler Murray. No one knows when he's really going to be available to play. And so, boy, that puts a lot of question marks on this team as they put this all together for the 2023 season.
No, absolutely. And it would be my contention to let Kyler take as much time as he needs. And you talk to different people around the NFL, and they say you can rebuild a roster in 18 months. Do you agree with that assessment? If the Cardinals have a top 5 pick this year, get a difference maker, you get 2 drafts in, and this thing could be headed back in the right direction within 2 drafts.
That's what you hope. It's headed in the right direction. Like you said, the key is whatever the draft picks end up being, if they end up picking at number 3, or if they can find a package where they can get a bunch of extra picks, which could include picks next year also, then it's all a matter of what you do with those choices. That's the bottom line of obviously of building your roster. And so, will they be able to get some, solid draft picks for DeAndre Hopkins if in fact he is traded? So yeah, this is certainly I don't want to say long-term, because who can define what long-term is, but it's certainly, looking toward the future. And I'll tell you, Mark, there's already people on Twitter, speculating that the Cardinals are going to be so bad that they could end up with the first pick in the draft next year, and then be able to, trade that pick for a team that wants Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
Who will be eligible for the draft this year. Who knows how that'll all will play out? You hope they're competitive enough to not be the worst team in the NFL, but hey, you never know how it's going to be, and we'll have a lot of charges probably that that they're tanking. But there's still a lot of time. There's still a lot of time in the offseason to see what they're going to do. Will they sign another quarterback aside from Colt McCoy that will ostensibly start at the beginning of the season? There's been a lot of speculation about Jacoby Brissett, who played with the Browns last year, where the new offensive coordinator, Drew Petzing, that was the quarterback's coach. Nothing has happened on that yet. He is still available. So, like I said, there's still things that can happen, and you just hope that they can put together a competitive enough roster, a good enough roster to be competitive. Certainly, I think re-signing Beachum and Hernandez was important. So now you have, the right side of your offensive line at least solid. You have DJ Humphries coming back at left tackle. You just got to figure out left guard and center, and that's that's the key to your team, especially on offense, is what you do on the offensive line, and that center position might be one of the biggest needs that they have entering this offseason, whether it's in free agency or in the draft.
All right, I want to bring this up right now. Zach Allen has just tweeted, "Thank you, Arizona." It's up on the screen. I've loved the last 4 years in Arizona and want to thank the Bidwell family and the entire Cardinal organization, including the coaches, staff, and my teammates. Most of all, thank you, Cardinal fans. You always supported me, and that is something I will never forget. Arizona will always be a special place for me and my family. So, yeah, Zach Allen, not Zach Gallen. I'm kind of relieved that Zach Allen and Zach Gallen don't play both right now in Arizona, because there was mass confusion whenever the two, we were talking about the two in the newsroom, the Diamondback pitcher and the defensive lineman for the Cardinals. But how big of a loss do you think it is to have Zach Allen off the defensive line? J.J. Watt retired, and Marcus Golden is gone. So I'm kind of looking at this thinking, where's the pass rush going to come from?
No, exactly. That front seven there's huge questions, around that right now on the defensive line and at linebacker. Certainly you have Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins at linebacker. But, yeah, like you said, where's the pass rush going to come from? What's the scheme going to be? No, all the coaches, they really have said, well, there really is no scheme. We're going to just use our players to the best of our ability. And they have some good young pass rushers like, Myjai Sanders and Cameron Thomas. But, guys like Sanders and others are guys that you would think would be pass rushers in the linebacker spot. But Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done on that side of the ball. Hey, look at cornerback right now. There's hardly anybody there. The departure of Murphy and Marco Wilson coming back, but after that, there's not much there at all right now. Maybe you re-sign Antonio Hamilton on a very team-friendly deal, and so a lot of those things could potentially happen. But all throughout this roster, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And like I said, I think fans understand a little bit. Okay, this is a rebuilding year. The team's not going to be real good. We also don't want to be bad. You want to be able to be competitive, because otherwise you start losing interest. The other interesting point, Mark, is that I'll say this: the Zach Allen deal, that one was real. The numbers that were reported, on that, with his the total value of over $15 million a year, over 32 guaranteed, with a $15 million signing bonus and guaranteed salaries in the first 2 years. So that was a significant deal. But isn't it interesting what Denver has done in the first couple of days of free agency? They're not holding back at all in terms of trying to build this team up. And of course, we know who the head coach is, Sean Payton. And, the sense is that he went to the Broncos because he knew the resources were going to be there to rebuild that roster. And they're certainly going all in the first couple of days of free agency, especially, with Allen, and on the offensive line also. And that's the bread and butter of every team. We look at this team that Jonathan Gannon just came from, the Eagles, obviously, and look how good that team was on the offensive and defensive lines. You look at the Cardinals right now, not so much. So there's a tremendous amount of work to be done there, because if you're not good in the trenches, you're not going to be good in the National Football League.
No, for sure. Got another tweet here to bring up, and it looks like Jameis Winston says he's staying in New Orleans. So that's probably not that much of a shock there, but just as some news and notes here. I guess as we look around the NFL, Sam Darnold to the 49ers, what do you think that says about the Brock Purdy, Trey Lance situation, and then Jimmy G to the Raiders?
I think it's a good signing for the 49ers, because while Sam Darnold is much maligned and has been a disappointing third overall pick in the draft, when he's been healthy, he's played pretty solid football. And even for Carolina last year, when he was healthy, he played pretty solid football. So what's interesting to me is the 49ers, a team that can't seem to keep its quarterbacks healthy, is now bringing in another guy who's had injury issues. But it's a very team-friendly one-year deal. And, Purdy, they believe, will be ready for the start of the season. Who knows what happens with Trey Lance? But Sam Darnold gives them a good veteran to come in there and be a good backstop for those guys if they would happen to need them, to need him. So I thought that was a pretty solid signing by the 49ers. They've lost a bunch of guys from that defense, and they lost Mike McGlinchey on the offensive line. So they need a new right tackle. So they've got some work to do in the offseason, but that certainly happens often to teams that are real good, that have a lot of money invested on offense and defense, and they don't have a lot of money invested in quarterback, which helps, but they've still lost some top players that they've got to replenish in this offseason.
All right, I'm bringing up Tom Brady's Twitter right now. I'm just checking it to make sure. Okay, the last tweet from him was it says right here, Tom Brady might not be done after all, and Tom Brady quote tweeted it on March the 7th. Today, what is today's date? The 15th, so a week ago. Anyone who thinks I have time to come back to the NFL has never adopted a 2-month-old kitten for their daughter. So Howard Balzer, I ask you, do you believe him? Will we see Tom Brady back in the NFL come opening day?
I will believe that he's not playing when the 2023 season is over. And that's the way, that's the way I look at it. Certainly some of the rumored teams for him have been, disappearing somewhat, but that doesn't mean that something, might not happen in the ensuing months with a team where someone would be in real need for a quarterback, and all of a sudden Tom Brady's phone rings and they said, hey, would you like to come here? So nothing would surprise me at all with him. And, Miami was seen as a possible landing spot where, his kids are living, and, and so that's ostensibly a big part why he decided to retire. So it made sense that it could be in the same town where his family is. But, like I said, nothing surprises me anymore in the NFL with anything. And it certainly wouldn't surprise me if he would come back at some point.
All right, and for you, how will you spend the rest of free agency, the frenzy here on Wednesday? You're talking to agents, obviously. What do you have is your ear twitching, anything you expect to come down, and what do you think the Cardinals roster looks like after today?
Yeah, there might be some things that, that come down today. If they see something, everyone's wondering if DeAndre Hopkins will be traded. I think the Cardinals are going to hold out on that to try to get the best deal. I mean, the Cardinals have some, pretty solid, cap room. And he the bottom line is at 1 o'clock today, when the new league year starts, his $30 million cap hit is on the books. And that's obviously a big hit. They don't necessarily want that for the rest of the offseason, but they can live with it for now. And I think they're going to hold out on this until they feel they can get the best deal. But the reality is this. I mean, Jalen Ramsey, who's 2 years younger than DeAndre Hopkins, traded by the Rams over the weekend, and all they got was a third-round pick and, just a guy at tight end named Hunter Long. So that's all the Rams could get for Jalen Ramsey, who is younger and hasn't had the injuries that DeAndre Hopkins had. I just don't see the Cardinals getting all that much for DeAndre Hopkins. Now, who knows? Maybe some team will jump in and say, hey, we'll give you a second. But I'd be surprised if that happens. But there really isn't – the Cardinals not spending a lot in free agency. They can live with that $30 million cap hit, for a while and hope that they can get a team that, will pay, that will give them a pretty good draft package. So I think that one could take a while. But other than that, I think we're, if anything, we'll just see signings of what we've seen in these first 2 days of guys that they're just filling in the roster for depth and to try to be competitive and see where it goes. But I certainly don't see any blockbuster signings coming down the pike for the Cardinals, whether it's now or even in a month ago.
Do you think Lamar Jackson ends up playing for the Baltimore Ravens next season?
I think it's looking more and more like that's what's going to happen. Now, one key thing is that even though this legal negotiating period opened on Monday, Lamar Jackson was not able to negotiate with any other teams or even talk to any other teams because he doesn't have an agent. And I think he is really hurting himself by not having an agent. Can anyone out there imagine after the league year starts today when he can start talking to teams? Can anybody imagine Lamar Jackson sitting there in his house or whatever and dialing up a general manager and saying, hey, would you have interest in me? Hey, let's talk contract. I mean, that's what agents do. Agents drum up interest. They can find out what the best deal is, and they can counsel the player on, hey, this is the way it is right now. And Lamar Jackson hasn't had that. So it certainly appears like it'll be the Ravens. Now, who knows? Maybe some team will come in and make an offer, but it'll also cost 2 first-round draft picks. If that happens, certainly you could come up with a trade that would be less than that. But here's a guy who's 26 years old. A 4 or 5 year contract is going to take him closer to that 30 years old. He's missed games because of injury at the end of the last 2 seasons. And he's not overall a consistent, accurate quarterback. And so while everybody is saying it's all about collusion because of the Deshaun Watson deal and guaranteed money, I think a lot of teams look at Lamar Jackson and say, we're going to give draft picks. We're not going to guarantee 4 or 5 years for a guy who might get hurt again and overall is not a great pocket quarterback. So I think that's what it's more about than anything else. And so to answer your question, like I said at the start, looks to me like it's going to be the Ravens, and he'll be playing it out at a little bit over $32 million.
All right, Howard, you need to ask your agent to get you a raise after today. This has been fantastic. So where can we find your stuff on PHNX, and where can we find you around the Valley on local media?
Yeah, go PHNX.com. Appear frequently on different radio stations, and so it's been it's good good along those lines. Of course, you mentioned my Twitter. I guess people could see it at HBALZER, HBalzer721. And so, contract numbers out and my little snarky comments here, here and there. And so just, looking forward to another, just tracking all these signings. And it's always a busy time, and always enjoy that about the NFL.
Well, he's a Hall of Fame voter, and he is an Extra Point Hall of Famer. We don't have a sculptor here to make quite the bust yet. That's not quite in the budget, but that's I'm going to work on that. And we at least need to get your picture up in the Extra Point podcast room. So thanks for taking some time. This maiden voyage from our new digital center here, going live on Arizona's Family. And have a great rest of the day, rest of the week, and looking forward to talking to you soon.
All right, take care, Mark. Enjoyed it.
All right, thank you, Howard. Well, that's going to do it for the Extra Point podcast here, live in the newsroom. The NFL free agent frenzy that continues here, and of course, the big story one more time. Aaron Rodgers says he wants to be a New York Jet. So we'll follow that. Tune it back here to Arizona's Family on all our platforms and on television tonight for the Extra Point television show at 10:35, the Valley's only nightly local sports show. We'll see you then, everybody.